If the bakery downstairs had not burned a tray of croissants at exactly 10:17 that Thursday night, I would have stepped into the service elevator alone with a man who had already decided what he was going to do with me. I am Elena Ruiz. I am 58 years old, and this is my story from Chicago. 7 months earlier, I had stood in the hallway of a rehab facility on the north side, signing forms with a hand that would not stop shaking. My younger brother, Matteo, had died 3 days before from a stroke no one saw coming. He was 54, too young for grief to look natural on him, too young for me to keep hearing people say things like, "At least he did not suffer long," as if short pain made loss easier to carry. Matteo had been the loud one between us, the one who could make a grocery run sound like an adventure, the one who never entered a room quietly and never left without giving everyone a reason to smile. When he died, the family seemed to collapse inward. My mother had already been gone for years. My marriage had ended long before that. My daughter, Sophia, lived in Milwaukee with 2 jobs, 1 little boy, and more stress than she ever admitted out loud. So when Matteo died, there was no one left to stand in the old center of our family and keep everyone connected. I had spent most of my adult life working front desks, clerical jobs, and whatever else paid enough to keep rent from becoming a threat. By 58, I was tired in the way that settles into your bones and starts calling itself personality. Retirement was not even a fantasy, it was a joke. I lived alone in a narrow apartment above a closed laundromat in Albany Park, and every month was a small negotiation between medicine, groceries, utilities, and the thin dignity of pretending I was still doing fine. That spring, a temp agency placed me at a private document restoration company in River North. It sounded more elegant than it was. We handled smoke-damaged records, water-damaged ledgers, old legal files, architectural plans, estate documents, art registries, and corporate archives that wealthy people and institutions needed preserved after floods, fires, and disasters. My official title was Intake Coordinator. What that meant in practice was that I logged incoming boxes, verified manifests, checked transfer receipts, flagged irregularities, and made sure custody records matched what physically arrived. It was quiet work, precise work, work that required patience more than brilliance. I liked that. Paper tells the truth if you let it sit long enough. The company worked in an old converted warehouse with polished floors, exposed brick, and expensive glass offices on the upper level. During the day, it looked impressive. At night, it became something else entirely. The air smelled faintly of dust, toner, and drying chemicals. The restoration rooms hummed. The loading dock lights cast long, pale rectangles across concrete. Every sound carried. Every footstep felt personal. My shift ran from 1 p.m. until 10 p.m. because evening intake was cheaper for the companies sending emergency materials. Most of the full-time staff left by 6. After that, it was just a skeleton crew, a lab technician or 2, sometimes 1 project manager upstairs finishing reports, a rotating security guard in the lobby, and me, in intake, checking manifests line by line while Chicago turned dark outside the warehouse windows. I took the Brown Line part of the way home, then I walked 3 blocks from the station to my apartment. Most nights that was manageable. Not ideal, but manageable. Until November, when a series of robberies near the station made the walk feel different. Not impossible, just heavier. You start to calculate things at my age. Streetlights, shoes, men who stand still too long, cars that idle without reason. You do not call it fear because that feels dramatic. You call it caution and keep moving. That's when I started seeing Omar. He was not a train conductor or guard. He ran the tiny coffee counter in the lobby of our building. During the day, the place sold espresso, bottled water, packaged sandwiches, and pastries to office tenants. At night, the owner left Omar to close up, count the till, and clean the machines. He was 46, maybe 47, with tired shoulders and a face that looked younger when he smiled and older when he thought no one was looking. He had come from Jordan years earlier, worked restaurant jobs, then delivery, then airport catering, and finally ended up at that coffee counter because the hours let him care for his father during the day. He did not tell me all of that at once. I learned it in fragments, the way people learn one another when life keeps placing them in the same hallway at the same tired hour. At first, he was just the man who noticed when I forgot to eat. "You are taking aspirin on an empty stomach again," he said one night as I stood at the counter, rubbing my temple. I looked at him, surprised. "How would you know that?" "You have the face for it," he said, "and you buy crackers only the days you forget lunch." It irritated me for about 3 seconds that he was right. Then I laughed because Mateo used to say the same thing. That was the first real conversation we had. After that, a pattern formed. Around 8:30, when the building settled into its nighttime hush, I would come downstairs for tea. Not coffee, tea. Mint if my stomach hurt. Chamomile if my nerves felt thin. Omar never made a show of remembering things, but he remembered everything anyway. No honey on the nights I had a cough because I said it coated my throat too much. Extra hot on rainy evenings because my hands stayed cold. Tea bag on the side when I looked especially tired because he said I always let it steep too long and drink bitterness like I had earned it. I never thought of us as friends at first. He was a familiar face, a person in the frame of my day. But loneliness is subtle. It does not always announce itself as misery. Sometimes it just makes routine feel heavier than it should. And then one evening, somebody remembers your tea order, asks if your grandson's fever went down, or notices the swelling in your wrist for carrying too many archive boxes, and suddenly the world seems slightly less indifferent than it did an hour ago. By December, those 5-minute stops at the counter became the warmest part of my shift. He told me about his father, who had early dementia and still insisted every afternoon that he needed to go open a store he had sold 15 years ago. He told me about his daughter Lean, who was in college and spoke to him mostly through blunt text messages that somehow sounded both affectionate and annoyed at once. He told me his ex-wife lived in Skokie, that the marriage had not ended with drama so much as exhaustion. "Two people can disappoint each other gently," he said once, and I thought that was one of the saddest true things I had heard in years. I told him about Mateo, about how empty my apartment felt now, about Sophia calling on Sundays and apologizing every time she had to hang up quickly because the baby was crying or the bus was late or life refused to slow down. He told me I started talking to myself at home just to hear a voice in the room, and he nodded like that made perfect sense. He never pushed. That was what made him easy to talk to. He listened in a way that didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like respect. What I didn't know was that while I was learning his silence, someone else in that building had started learning mine. The first sign was so small I nearly dismissed it. A set of shipping manifests came in from a downtown law firm after a pipe burst in one of their storage rooms. 3 sealed cartons, chain of custody forms attached, rush restoration requested. That part was ordinary. What was not ordinary was the discrepancy between the outer manifest and the internal folder index. The carton labels listed probate files. The folder tabs inside included property deeds, trust amendments, and one slim envelope marked Private Transfer Agreement. I flagged it, logged the discrepancy, and sent a note upstairs to the after-hours project manager, a polished man named Graham. Not the inventor, though everyone made that joke exactly once, and then never again because his laugh told you he was tired of it. He came down, glanced at the forms, and said, "Just note it and move it through. They're panicking because of the flood. We'll reconcile tomorrow." His tone was normal, too normal. It was the kind of normal that leaves a residue. The next week, a second irregular shipment arrived, this one from a private estate office in Winnetka after smoke damage. The intake form had been altered by hand, original item count crossed out, new count added in different ink.
signature line smudged as if someone had tried to blur it. Again, I logged it. Again, Graham came down. Again, he told me not to worry. He said, "These rich people can't organize a closet," he lightly said. Maybe I would have left it alone if Matteo was still alive. He was the one who used to say, "Your problem, Elena, is that you notice the thread and then pull until the whole sweater is on the floor." He meant it as both criticism and admiration, but after he died, noticing things became one of the few ways I still felt useful, so I kept notes. Nothing dramatic, just dates, shipment numbers, altered counts, initials that did not match, cases where the electronic file requests preceded the physical delivery by an hour or two in a way that suggested someone knew exactly what was coming before it arrived. I didn't tell anyone except Omar. Not because he worked there, he didn't. The coffee counter.
When I told myself I had probably taken it home by mistake, I almost believed it. Then Omar asked me why I looked angry instead of tired. "Because something is missing," I said. "What kind of missing?" The question stopped me. There are different kinds, aren't there? Lost, stolen, hidden, taken because it matters, taken because someone wanted you to notice. "A notebook," I said. "Does anyone know what was in it?" "No." He studied my face for a second too long. That is not the same as no one caring what might have been in it. I should have gone to building security that night. I should have filed a formal report. But embarrassment is powerful. So is uncertainty. I did not want to be the older employee making noise over a cheap notebook and a feeling she could not prove. Women my age are trained to second-guess our own alarms. We do it so often it starts to feel like professionalism. February came in brittle and gray. The city looked rubbed thin at the edges. One night, the wind was so hard against the warehouse windows that the old glass shivered in its frame. Business was unusually heavy. A fire at a municipal storage facility had sent us 6 emergency pallets of smoke-damaged city records. I stayed late processing them. Graham stayed later. Twice he came down from the upper offices to ask whether a shipment from a private trust had arrived. He sounded overly casual both times. "No," I said, "nothing from a trust tonight." By 9:50, the lab technicians had left. By 10:05, I was alone on intake except for the guard in the lobby and Omar downstairs closing up. I was sealing a carton when the freight elevator doors opened behind me. I turned, expecting Graham. It was the well-dressed man. He smiled as if we had met before. "Still here?" His voice was warm, confident, the kind of voice that assumes access. "We're closing," I said. He glanced around the intake area, at the manifests, the computer, the stacked boxes. "You must be Elena." Something in my chest tightened. "Have we met?" "Not properly. I'm Adrian Vale." The name meant nothing to me then. It would later. He stepped a fraction closer, still smiling. "Graham mentioned you're the most meticulous person in the building." The compliment landed wrong. It did not sound admiring. It sounded like measurement. I kept my tone flat. "If you need something, you'll have to speak to management in the morning." He tipped his head. "I only came to collect a personal item. There are no personal pickups through intake after hours." That smile again. "You're very exact." "Yes," I said. For 1 second, his expression changed. Not much, just enough. The warmth left it. I saw calculation underneath. Then he smiled again and lifted his hands as if to say, "No trouble. Understood. Have a good night." He walked back toward the freight elevator. I watched him until the doors closed. My pulse had accelerated so fast it made me lightheaded. I hated that. I hated that a man with a good coat and a pleasant voice could unsettle me more effectively than someone openly rude. Openly rude, at least, makes itself visible. I went downstairs immediately and found Omar wiping the pastry case glass. "There's a man here after hours," I said. He looked up at once. "What man?" I described him. Omar's hand stilled on the cloth. "Silver watch? Navy coat?" "Yes." "I've seen him twice this week in the lobby. He asked if you always leave at 10. Ice moved through me.
What did he say? That you usually do not appreciate strangers asking about employees. His face had gone very still. Did he say what he wanted? No. That was the first time Omar walked me all the way to the station platform. He did not make a speech about it. He simply locked his counter, put on his coat, and said, "I need to get something from the newsstand anyway." There was no newsstand open at that hour within 3 blocks, and we both knew it, but I let him preserve the fiction because dignity matters, even in fear. As we waited for the train, he said quietly, "Tell someone above Graham tomorrow, not security, higher." Why not security? Because if this man is comfortable asking questions in the lobby, he either thinks no one will stop him or he already knows who will not. I looked at him sharply. "You think I'm being watched?" He did not answer immediately. Then he said, "I think people usually reveal themselves before they act. The problem is that most of us are too polite to call the revealing what it is." The next day, I asked to speak to the operations director, a woman named Patrice, who worked normal business hours and treated details like currency. I showed her the intake discrepancies I'd been logging, the altered counts, the repeated involvement of Graham, the missing notebook, the after-hours presence of an unknown man asking for me by name. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "Email me everything you have, including dates you're not sure about. Do not mention this to Graham." My mouth went dry. "So I'm not imagining it?" "No," she said, "you are not." By the end of the day, 2 things happened. First, Patrice called to say she was bringing in an external auditor quietly and wanted me to keep working as usual. Second, Graham sent me an unusually friendly message asking if I could cover an extra late shift Thursday because a rush estate transfer was coming in and he trusted only me to process sensitive material. That message felt like a hand closing around the back of my neck. Thursday became all I could think about. For 2 days, nothing visible changed. Graham behaved normally. Omar kept asking ordinary questions in an ordinary tone. "Did your daughter call? Did you wear better shoes today? Would you like mint or chamomile?" The building breathed in and out around us. Work continued. Boxes arrived, paper dried, the copy room jammed as usual. People laughed in the break room over things none of us would remember a week later. But beneath it was something taut. Thursday morning, Patrice forwarded me a short note before my shift. "Do not stay alone tonight if you can avoid it. We are moving carefully. Call me if anything feels wrong." That should have reassured me. Instead, it made my skin prickle. Moving carefully is what people say when they suspect danger but have not yet contained it. I did not tell Sophia. She worried easily and had no time for fear she could not fix. I did not tell my neighbor Mrs. Kawa, who already believed every package theft in the neighborhood was part of a citywide criminal network. I told only Omar. He read the note over my shoulder when I came down for tea at 8:30. Then he looked at me and said, "You are not going to the train alone tonight." "I can call a car." "No." The firmness of it startled me. "You close the counter at 9:30. You have your father." I arranged for my cousin to sit with him. He folded the note once, carefully, and handed my phone back. "I will wait." I almost argued. Then I saw something in his face I had not seen before. Not fear, recognition. Like a man who had seen this shape of trouble in another life and knew exactly where it could lead if ignored. The hours between 8:30 and 10 became unbearable. Every ordinary sound felt staged. Graham came downstairs twice to ask if the trust shipment had arrived. It had not. At 9:12, the loading dock buzzer sounded. A courier delivered 2 sealed cartons from a private estate firm on the Gold Coast. Graham signed the transfer form himself instead of letting me do it, then carried the slimmer carton upstairs. "That one isn't on the manifest," I said. He smiled without warmth. "Supplemental material. You need to log it. I'll take care of it." He turned away before I could respond. At 9:48, my computer froze while I was entering the remaining intake data. When it rebooted, 2 prior log entries were gone. Not corrupted, gone, deleted cleanly. I stared at the screen, heart kicking in my throat. Then my extension rang. It was Graham. "Can you bring the trust folder up to conference room B?" he asked. "The auditor wants to review it before morning." Every instinct in me pulled back. There is no folder logged under the trust shipment yet. Silence for half a beat, then smooth again. "Right, my mistake. Just come up for a moment when you finish." I hung up without answering. My hands were cold. I picked up my phone and texted Patrice. "He's asking me upstairs. Unlogged trust shipment, deleted entries on my screen." The reply came 30 seconds later. "Do not go anywhere alone. Leave now if you can." I stood, gathered my coat, and slipped my small notebook of copied intake numbers into my tote. The moment I stepped into the corridor, I knew something had changed. The building had that false quiet of held breath. Too still. Even the ventilation hums seemed distant. The freight elevator dinged at the far end. I turned toward the lobby stairs instead. Halfway down, I heard footsteps above me. Measured, not rushed, following. I did not look back. I kept walking, one hand on the rail, pulse hammering so hard it blurred my vision. At the bottom of the stairs, I pushed through the fire door into the lobby corridor and saw Omar standing at the coffee counter with his coat on, watching me. The relief that hit me was immediate and humiliating. I had not realized how frightened I was until I saw a familiar face. He took one look at me and stepped away from the counter. What happened? Deleted logs. Graham wants me upstairs. Someone was behind me. His expression hardened. Then the smell hit us. Burnt butter, charred dough, sharp and wrong. Omar turned. Behind the counter, inside the small convection oven, black smoke was starting to curl through the vent. He swore under his breath and moved fast, yanking open the oven, killing the power, dragging out a tray of ruined croissants he had forgotten during inventory. An alarm chirped from the oven panel, shrill and insistent. It was such a stupid, ordinary mistake. A tray left too long, a smell, a beep, a trivial interruption in the middle of what felt like a carefully tightening trap. But because of that interruption, neither of us stepped immediately toward the service elevator doors that opened into the lobby 2 seconds later. Adrian Vale walked out. He was alone. No smile this time. He looked first at me, then at Omar, then at the smoking tray, calculating all of it in an instant. For one suspended moment, none of us moved. Then he said, almost pleasantly, "Elena, Graham is waiting upstairs." Omar set the tray down with deliberate care. "She is leaving." Vale's eyes shifted to him. "This is company business." "This is lobby coffee," Omar said. "And she is leaving." I had never heard his voice like that. Flat, clean, stripped of all softness. Vale took one step closer. "You should mind your counter." Then from somewhere above us, a door slammed hard, running footsteps, male voices. Not one, several. Vale heard them too. His face changed. He turned and moved fast toward the rear service corridor. "Go," Omar snapped at me. He grabbed my elbow and pulled me through the front lobby doors into the freezing night air, just as 2 men in plain clothes came barreling down the interior hall, shouting, "Stop! Chicago PD!" The sound that followed was a collision of footsteps, curses, a crash of metal, then someone yelling for the back exit to be covered. I remember the cold most clearly, Chicago cold that cuts behind your eyes. I stood on the sidewalk shaking while Omar kept one hand firm around my upper arm, not restraining, just anchoring. Patrice came out a minute later, breathless, hair half fallen from its clip. Behind her, officers moved quickly through the lobby. One of them was speaking to a radio. Another had Graham face down near the reception desk with his hands pulled behind him. The world narrowed. Graham. Not a mistake, not nerves, not me being dramatic, not a wealthy client misunderstanding procedure. Graham. Patrice looked at me and said, "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "Did he get near you?" "No." She exhaled once, hard. "Good." I should have asked questions then, but shock makes the mind stupid. Instead, I stared through the glass doors as officers hauled Adrian Vale back inside through the side entrance, one sleeve torn, jaw bloodied, expression no longer polished at all, just furious. Omar did not let go of my arm until an officer specifically asked to speak with me. The next several hours broke into fragments: a conference room upstairs, bright with fluorescent light, a detective with a notebook in deep lines around his mouth, Patrice sitting beside me, no longer the composed operations director, but a woman vibrating with contained anger. Graham and Vale's names spoken over and over, terms like asset diversion, forged probate addendums, substituted transfer records, and high-value estate theft. Slowly, the outline emerged. For nearly a year, Graham had been identifying vulnerable estate archives, dead clients, elderly beneficiaries, trusts in dispute, records arriving after water or smoke damage when confusion and urgency made discrepancies easier to hide. My intake logs had started revealing the pattern. My missing notebook told them I had noticed. Patrice had contacted outside counsel and police 2 days earlier. That Thursday night's trust shipment was part of a controlled attempt to confirm what Graham would do with a high-value file already under suspicion. Unmarked officers had been positioned in the building. They expected document tampering. They did not expect Graham to try to isolate me upstairs. They did not expect Vale to come down himself. What was he going to do? I asked finally. The detective looked at me for a long moment before answering. We can't prove intent beyond witness movement yet, but he was not there to discuss paperwork. Those words landed with a kind of terrible precision. He was not there to discuss paperwork. I gave my statement, then another. Then I repeated the sequence from memory until the order of sounds felt more real than the order of events. Burnt pastry, elevator bell, his voice, Omar saying, "She is leaving." At 2:25 in the morning, the detective asked one more question. Has anyone in your family ever had dealings with a man named Adrian Vale? No, I said immediately. Then he slid a printed sheet across the table. It was a property transfer dispute from 19 years earlier, one signature page, one legal assistant listed in the administrative record as the employee who had flagged a forged witness stamp before the deed transfer closed. Me. I stared at the document, not understanding at first. Then memory came back in a rush. A downtown title office, a rushed real estate package, an angry man in an expensive suit arguing that the missing seal was a technicality. My supervisor at the time escalating it, the sale being frozen, the man storming out. Was that him? I whispered. The detective nodded. Different beard, same man. Everything inside me went still. He had not just noticed me recently, he had recognized me. Not at first, maybe, but at some point. The meticulous intake clerk at the restoration company, the same woman who had once inconvenienced a property fraud scheme years earlier, the same woman now flagging discrepancies again. The detective tapped the paper lightly. He has a long memory. I thought of the way Vale looked at me in intake when he said, "You must be Alina." Not curiosity, recognition. I thought I might be sick.
By morning, the story was larger than I understood. Search warrants were executed at Vale's office, Graham's condo, and an off-site storage locker. They found altered estate packets, counterfeit seals, notarization tools, burner phones, and enough financial records to suggest theft in the millions. Multiple families would spend months, maybe years, repairing the legal damage. But the part that belonged to me was simpler and more frightening. They had identified me as a risk. They had taken my notebook. They had deleted my entries. And on Thursday night, before police moved in, Graham had attempted to get me upstairs alone while Vale came down to intercept. If Omar had not been in the lobby when I reached the stairs, I do not know what story I would be telling now. Maybe none at all. I did not go home that night, or the next. The police arranged for me to stay in a downtown hotel under temporary protection while they assessed whether anyone else connected to the fraud network might try to recover materials or intimidate witnesses. Temporary protection is a phrase that sounds official enough to soothe people on television. In real life, it means sleeping with the lamp on in a room that smells like bleach and hotel detergent, while every hallway sound makes your pulse spike. Sophia came down from Milwaukee the next day after I finally told her the truth.
She cried in the chair by the window while trying not to cry in front of me, which was so exactly what daughters do that I almost smiled. My grandson, Mateo, named for my brother, stayed with his other grandmother so Sophia could remain 2 nights. She kept asking, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" And I kept answering, "Because I wasn't sure," until we both understood I meant more than just the danger. Uncertainty silences people, especially women who have spent decades being called difficult whenever we trusted our own reading of a room. Omar came by once, briefly, with a paper cup of mint tea he bought from somewhere else because he said hotel tea tasted like regret. We sat by the window overlooking a gray Chicago street and said very little. Gratitude is awkward when it is large enough to feel like debt. "You forgot your scarf," he said, handing it to me. I looked at him. "That's what you came to tell me?" He said, "I came to tell you," he said quietly, "that you were right to notice." I looked away because that was somehow harder to hear than any dramatic reassurance. Fear is bad enough, but self-doubt attached to fear can poison you for years. The investigation widened quickly. Because the fraud touched estate documents, title records, and probate materials, more agencies got involved than I can now list cleanly from memory. Lawyers arrived, internal reviews began, families hired counsel. Patrices of the world had meetings behind glass. Detectives asked for timelines, technicians imaged computers. The warehouse stayed open in limited capacity, but intake procedures changed overnight. Dual sign-offs, camera reviews, restricted access, digital audit backups routed off-site. When I returned to work 2 weeks later, the building felt altered in a way that went beyond policy. Places remember. The lobby still smelled faintly of coffee, the restoration room still hummed, the freight elevator still gave that same sterile ding before opening, but I no longer moved through the space casually. I noticed angles, reflections, exit routes, who stood where when talking to me. Trauma does not necessarily make you dramatic. Sometimes it just upgrades your awareness permanently. Graham was charged, Vale was charged, more names followed. Some surprised me. One did not. A day shift receiving clerk I always thought was too eager to handle damaged trust packets, a remote consultant who pushed revised inventories through without original scan references. Criminal networks rarely look like movies. They look like ordinary emails and politely worded process exceptions. The hardest part was testifying. People imagine testimony as a clean act of courage. Stand up, tell the truth, sit down. It is not like that. It is repetition, precision, being asked the same question 6 ways until the answer begins to feel detached from your own memory. It is defense attorneys saying words like assumption and perception in tones that suggest your fear was probably administrative confusion dressed up by age and loneliness. Vale's attorney was skilled in a particularly oily way. He tried to make me sound paranoid, then sentimental, then confused. He suggested the missing notebook could have been misplaced. The deleted entries could have been software error. Vale's presence in the building could have been linked to client consultation. Graham's call could have been ordinary project urgency. Then the prosecutor played the lobby camera footage. Not all of it, just enough. Me coming down the stairs quickly, coat half on, Vale exiting the elevator less than 4 seconds later and moving toward me before noticing Omar. The visible shift in his posture when he saw I was not alone, the plainclothes officers entering frame from the rear corridor. No one in the courtroom breathed normally while that footage played. Then Omar testified. He wore his only dark suit, a little too big in the shoulders, tie slightly off-center, hands folded so tightly in his lap before taking the stand that I could see the strain from where I sat. But when he spoke, his voice did not shake. He described the questions Vale had asked in the lobby over prior weeks, whether I always left at 10, whether I lived alone, whether I drove or took the train. He described noticing that Graham had started coming downstairs more often near closing time whenever specific estate shipments arrived. He described my face that Thursday when I came into the lobby after Graham called me upstairs. He said, "She looked," he paused once as if searching for the cleanest word, "she looked like someone who had understood the room had changed." That sentence went through me like cold water, because that was exactly what it felt like. The defense asked if he considered himself unusually protective of female employees. He said, "No, I consider myself unusually attentive." Even the judge looked up at that. The verdict took 3 days. Guilty on conspiracy, fraud, records tampering, attempted witness intimidation, and additional charges related to property instruments. I wish I could tell you justice felt triumphant. It did not. It felt heavy. Necessary, but heavy. A thing built out of documents, testimony, and the slow mechanical grind of consequence. Real life offers fewer cinematic endings than people want. No one clapped, no music rose. I just sat there with my coat folded on my lap and thought, so this is what it looks like when danger is finally given its proper name. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters hovered near the steps because the estate fraud angle was newsworthy. Microphones appeared, cameras turned. Patrice gave a brief statement. I did not, neither did Omar. Some stories become public without ever belonging to the public. Life afterward did not return to normal. It built a new normal instead. The company offered me a promotion into compliance support, better pay, daytime hours eventually. I accepted the pay and refused the day shift at first because fear had made me stubborn. Then, after 2 months, I realized the night building no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to memory. So I transitioned to earlier hours and let myself admit what my body had already decided. I was tired of walking through corridors that taught me too much. Sophia started calling more often, not out of panic, out of intention. There is a difference. She said nearly losing me had clarified a few things. I wanted to tell her that life is always clarifying things, and we just rarely listen before being forced to. Instead, I said, I'm glad, because parents don't always need to turn wisdom into speeches. Omar's father declined sharply that spring. On good days, he recognized me as the tea lady. On bad days, he asked Omar if the store had been opened yet. There was no store. There hadn't been for years. Still, Omar answered him gently every time. Watching a person repeat kindness in the face of vanishing memory changes your understanding of strength. We began having dinner on Sundays. At first, it was practical. I would bring soup to his apartment because he couldn't easily leave his father alone in the evenings. Then his daughter Lean came by 1 week from campus and stayed. Then Sophia visited with my grandson another week. Then, somehow, there were 6 of us around a table that didn't quite fit us, eating lentil soup and roasted chicken, while children dropped spoons and adults talked over one another, and nobody seemed quite sure when this had stopped being occasional. I thought often about Mateo during those dinners, about how he would have loved them, how he would have said, "See, you pull one thread and sometimes the whole sweater does not unravel. Sometimes it gets rewoven." One evening in June, months after the trial, Omar told me something he had never mentioned before. Years earlier, at the airport catering company, a woman on his shift had complained that a supervisor kept rearranging schedules to isolate certain workers in the loading bays after hours. He thought the man was merely disorganized. He had noticed oddness, but not danger. Then, one night, the woman was assaulted at a service corridor. She survived, the supervisor was fired and later charged, but Omar carried the fact that he had seen fragments and failed to assemble them in time. "That is why I watched," he said quietly. We were sitting on folding chairs on his back porch while his father slept inside and evening traffic moved like distant water beyond the alley. That is why I asked questions, why I walked you to the train, why I did not like the way that man looked at you. I knew the shape. I knew it, and I was afraid of being wrong, but I was more afraid of being wrong the other way again. I did not answer immediately. Then I said, "You were not wrong." He nodded once, staring out into the deepening blue between buildings. There's a strange intimacy in being saved by someone who doesn't think of himself as heroic. Heroic people